Hey, let's talk about garden planning. It can be scary or fun or nerve-wracking or exciting, kind of depending on if you have experience with it already or if it's just overwhelming or, a whole bunch of different things. And it might be just a mental exercise that you do, or it might be the kind of thing that you take extensive notes and write things down and draw little maps. So I'm McCare, and here at More Piranha Gardens, we are starting to plan for next year. If you caught my video last week about planning your seed orders, then you have probably done your homework on that, and you might have seeds on the way, and you have an idea of what you're going to be growing. If you did not catch that video, I will link it at the end for you. Don't worry about that. And I will give you a new homework assignment to help you get ready for the next step. So let's jump in. We're going to start planning with a site map and by figuring out our zones. That sounds complicated. It's really not, okay? So these are permaculture ideas, and we're going to start with zones. So zones are the areas in our home and around our home, kind of going out, not necessarily nesting doll style, but moving out from our major domicile, okay? So your house is zone 0. The stuff where you go a couple of times a day, that's zone 1. Stuff where you go once a day, every other day-ish is zone 2. Things where you go once or twice a week, zone 3. If you visit it a little bit less than that, it could still be a zone 3. Zone 4 is going to be farther out. You visit it now and then. And zone 5 is out there. It's out there. For me, it's the lake. I go down there occasionally, not really. Also, the front yard is zone 5 for me. I just don't go that way. All right, so that's the zones, and we'll look at that practically in a second. And then you want to know your sectors. And so I will show you my site map, and it's not going to make a lot of sense at first, but it will. So here's mine. And what we have here is the fence line. Woo! We have the fence line. And I put in where the house is. And then my zone 1 is going to be the kitchen garden and this tree guild and the chicken area. And I have all my gardens marked on here. All the gardens that I grew last year are on this map. And the sun for the summer and the sun for the winter is marked. If you go to suncalc.net, suncalc.net, it will tell you that the map doesn't work well when you get there. It's fine. It works well enough. And you can go to any date and it'll give you the sun path, and you put in your location and it gives you your map. And it'll give you the sun path. So I did my sun path for the shortest day of the year and the longest day of the year. So my winter sun goes here, and I know that some of my beds are always going to be shaded in the winter. Any time of day, they're going to be shaded in the winter. My summer sun has a much bigger section. So it rises over here. The parts that are fully shaded in the winter, they get sun in the summer. So those are beds I have to pay special attention to because they don't always get sun. And then I know that this whole big section of the yard is open to sunlight all the time. So let's take a look at some of the things that I have on my site map. The entrance to the house begins my zone 1. So I have my kitchen gardens, the strawberry beds down there, and then this is my kitchen garden expansion. Those are zone 1. My potted area, Fort Box, the chicken coop, my potting table, my compost, whatever garden, and that tree. Those are my zone 1. I visit these spots a couple of times a day, especially the chickies back here. This is the frequent area. This is the area that I'm going to put the things that need the most attention, okay? So, and stuff that I want to grab the quickest, like my herbs are right outside the back door. Aside from assigning your zones on your site map, and you might draw out a detailed site map like I did, or you might just walk around and get it in your head. You can also walk around with your phone and record parts of your garden or your yard and talk to it and make your site map off of that. So there's a lot of different ways to go about it. Whether you're right brain, left brain, split brain, you got an extra brain, whatever's working, there's a way for you to work this out. Regardless of how you do your site map, there are things you'll want to consider. I'm going to read them off so I don't forget anything. So, structures, trees, and the slope of your land. Those are things that are not easily changed. So you definitely want those. Where does the water come from? That's going to be partially with your slope. So like if it runs down in a rain event, or where's your hose? Where does the sun come into your land? And you can look on SunCalc for that. Where does the wind come across your land? For us, the winter wind comes from behind the trampoline and blows all the way across, and that is why there's a rope on that moringa tree. That is also why the chicken coop is protected by the house from the winter wind. If you have a noise sector, like a highway, then you might want to plant to reduce that noise. Fire sector, if that is an issue for you, if there's an area that's prone to fire, you might want to have a water feature between you and that. Or some things that aren't very flammable. Don't plant the eucalyptus there. If you have a microclimate, you'll want to mark that on your site map. It might be a warmer or a cooler spot. It might be a spot that stays humid longer. You don't want to plant your tomatoes there, that sort of thing. Paths and gardens. Now, I don't have paths on my site map yet because we're starting with the gardens, which is backwards. You're supposed to start with your paths. But we started with trees and we're working on planting around those. So we have our gardens on our site map, but not our paths yet because we haven't put those in. And then, where do your pests and your cuties come from? Armadillos live back there. Bunnies live back there. And a possum lives over there. So I know where the pests and the cuties are. I know where they come from. I know that I need to protect about the bunnies. I'm not worried about the armadillos, and I'm not worried about the possum. Okay? So structures, trees, slope, water, sun, wind, noise, microclimates, pests and cuties, paths and gardens. Have those things on your site map. So the next thing we want to take a look at is if you did garden last year, whether that was one plant in a pot or you planted out every bit of land you have, take a look at what worked, what didn't work, what meh, and maybe you write all that down, maybe you just mentally review it. So something that worked really well for me this year was my herb and pepper area near the back door. That is the most established garden space that we have. It has the best soil in it. And, it's right by the back door, so it gets tended well. And it did really, really well. My oldest tomato bed did really well. Things in the meh category. I got a couple of Kajari melons. They were quite yummy. My golden delicious tree is very sad looking right now, but it did pretty well. It's a first year tree. It's fine. I don't go the utter neglect method with planting trees, but I also don't baby them. If they're not going to make it the first year, I want to know then and there. I'm not going to baby them through their first year and then have them get a couple of years old and go, wait, I don't know how to make roots, and then So I'm going to put that tree in the meh category. And then stuff that did not do well was the guild for this tree. And most of that was because, whoops. Most of the reason this guild didn't do well is because this is new bare land on, and I just put wood chip on top. And that's never going to be great in the first few months of doing it. And I knew that going in. I'm just trying to get roots in the ground, ground covered, those kinds of things. So when you look at what went well, you look at why. So my beds that did well were more established. So that tells me I'm moving in the right direction with conditioning this land. My stuff that did meh, that was in newer gardens that I haven't really established very well yet. So the same logic carries there. Like the beds that did better this year were more established. So this coming year, the beds that did meh should do better. And I have compost to add to them and the sorts of things like that. The things that did not do as well. So like this guild here, well, I know that it's had wood chip sitting on it for almost a year at this point. So it will be better. The stuff I planted later did better. The beds along the back of the fence did horribly, but I just plunked down wood chip and wished. So I know those will do better. I know that because of my cutie pest problem back there, I'm planting a buffer zone for the bunnies and figuring out how to protect my plants. So take the things that you know about how your garden did, figure out what changes you need to make based on how your things did or what you need to keep. Whether or not you gardened this year, this is something you can look at going forward. And that is, what style of gardening do you want to do? Do you want to do row cropping? I'm going to discourage that. But if that's what you want to do, look into it. Do you want to do raised beds? Do you want to plant in ground? Do you want to interplant? Which some people call that companion planting, and they're similar but not the same. So it's basically like in my tomato area, I could just plant tomatoes, or I can interplant with some companions that might help the tomatoes. Like if I plant dill back there, it's going to attract parasitic wasps. I get so tongue-tied. And parasitic wasps will infect and kill hornworms, which eat tomato plants. So you can build beneficial relationships, and then anytime you interplant, you're automatically going to create some confusion for pests. So that's always going to be a bonus. But if you're not sure about exactly how you want to go about it, look into container gardening, look into raised bed gardening, look into lasagna gardening or sheet mulching. Those are, again, kind of the same thing, not exactly, but if you look up one, you'll find information on both. Look up interplanting. Figure out what style of garden you want to do and then work within that. So we interplant and we focus on tree guilds. So here's an apple tree, and we did have a freeze last night, so we've got some damage here, but we've got a lot of basils around it. We have a roselle around it. We have comfreys around it. All sorts of different plants that are going to support the apple tree, either by lending nutrients, by bringing in pollinators, by creating confusion for pests. There's garlic. I might actually be sitting on a garlic at the moment. Just all sorts of stuff around the tree to support it. So you can plan based on what style of garden you want to do now that you have your site map and possibly your seed orders from last week's homework. Once you've figured out your map and what worked and what didn't and what was meh and what style you want, you can start to think about your priorities. So one of my priorities is tomatoes. We've talked before, tomatoes is one of the foods that I am trying to replace. I don't buy fresh tomatoes. I haven't in a year and a half. And I've gotten away with that just fine. I'm never hurting for fresh tomatoes. Well, except in the coldest parts of the year. But I still have tomatoes on the bush, and last year I had fresh tomatoes for 6 weeks after I picked my last. So I think I might get almost to new fresh tomatoes before I'm out of fresh tomatoes, which would be really exciting. But anyways, tomatoes are one of my priorities. If I can double my tomato production next year, I won't need to buy salsas or sauces or stewed tomatoes either. So getting my tomatoes situated is one of my top priorities. Getting my tree guilds built out. So I have the 2 apple tree guilds, and then there's an oak tree down there, and he's going to get a guild. That oak tree was here before I got here. I have some tomatoes behind it, which they are in a great little microclimate back there, but also they don't get much sun back there. So they've been really slow to grow. So I'm going to develop that tree guild and the 2 apple tree guilds a little bit better. I'm going to make sure that they have nitrogen fixers in all the guilds. I'm going to make sure that they have nutrient accumulators in all the guilds, and vining crops and root crops and herbaceous layers. I want pollinators in there. I want pest confusion. I want stuff for the bunnies to eat. I want stuff to keep the bunnies away, depending on the guild. All right, so we're just going to figure out what our priorities are in our garden, and those get the prime real estate. So whatever else anything needs, it's going to have to compete with my tomatoes and my tree guilds to get attention and resources, because those are the most important things for me and my garden. Figure out what yours are. Oh, and another priority for me is the buffer zone behind the fence. I'm going to have to spend a lot of time behind the fence this year because of the bunny situation. So once you've figured out all those things, you can start to look at the growth requirements of the plants that you want to use. And on your seed packets, you will find things like needs sun 6 to 8 hours, and it's okay with the frost. These are beets. Needs full sun versus full or partial. So full or partial being celery, full sun being a pepper. Oops. And then here's another pepper, and it says 8 to 12 hours. Sometimes you'll get packets that don't have info, either because the company just doesn't provide it, or when the companies get really slammed, sometimes they have to use substitute envelopes that don't have all the information on them. In that case, you can just go online and look it up, or if you have something similar. So if I have one packet of slicer tomato seeds that doesn't have the information on it, I can look at all my other similar sized tomatoes and similar growing tomatoes and get kind of an idea. That will help me know things like this habanero did really well up here in the summertime. This is that area that gets blocked by the house and gets no light in the winter, but gets plenty in the summer. So since I'm not expecting my peppers to live through the winter, it's fine that they're here and they got enough. But if it were warm enough for them to continue through the winter, they wouldn't because of the sunlight. And then you can also group your plants by watering needs. So here, I'll show you over here. This is the start of a medicinal garden, and there's not much here. It's the start. There used to be a compost bin here, and it recently moved. So we have a marshmallow plant down here, and a bee balm, and some rabbit cages that I'm going to protect plants with. And everything that goes into this garden is going to have similar water requirements to that marshmallow plant, because the marshmallow is my anchor. It's my priority for this area because it's going to be the biggest plant in this area. So I'll plan this whole garden around the needs of that one plant. And then things will go into the shady areas where the shade will be created by the marshmallow once it's big. and we'll kind of plan it that way. So we've talked about some things to consider, and I'm going to give you your homework. Once again, this homework is not for me. It doesn't matter to me if you do your homework. It really doesn't. It might matter to you though. So whether you write all this down, whether you just think about it, whether you take your phone around and record yourself a little video that you can refer back to, it doesn't matter how you do it. But here's some things you might want to do. Go back and look at the seed ordering video if you didn't already watch that. Start with that. I'll put a link up here in a minute. Figure out your site map. Where does the sun, the water, the pest, where do those things come into your area? If you have a wind zone or a fire zone, where do those come from? Where are the structures that you can't work around? Where are the trees? Where do you want the gardens? Where are the existing gardens? Write all those things down or make some sort of a note of them. If you gardened last year, what worked and what didn't? What are you going to keep about the things that worked? What are you going to change about the things that didn't? And what are you going to do about the stuff that was meh? This is not a chance for you to criticize yourself. This is not a chance for you to list your faults. This is a chance for you to make improvements, okay? We make mistakes so that we can learn. What style of garden do you want? Now, we talked about some different ideas. Container gardening, raised beds, in-ground, lasagna, all of it, tree guilds. You don't have to do just one. The only time I've had good carrots was in a raised bed. Otherwise, I hate raised beds. I might build a little tiny raised bed just for carrots. You know, if that's the only way I've gotten carrots to grow really well, maybe I do that. And I have some tree guilds, and most of my gardens are lasagna gardens. Figure out how you want to lay them out. They don't all have to be the same. You can mix and match. You can try things out. You can work situationally. Whatever you need to do. Just figure out what you want. It's your garden. What are your priorities? What are the most important things? Those are the things that you're going to plan for first. Write those down. And then figure out the sun and water requirements of the plants that you want to grow so that you can plan based on those. Alrighty? Get that homework done. Next Monday, we're going to meet back and we're going to start talking about when to start your seedlings. We're going to come up with a really loose schedule for starting your seedlings for the spring. Alrighty? So that will be next Monday. And this week, I'll give you a garden tour of the whole backyard and what is staying, changing, and all that good stuff for the winter. Alrighty? That will be your seed ordering video, and then I'll put another video for you here. And later, y'all.